All right, welcome to day 2 of chronological order of reading the Bible in 1 year. We're going to get straight to it. We're reading Genesis 4, 5, and 6. And again, there's quite a lot of stuff to go over, but I'm going to try to make these a little bit faster for you. I have some charts here that I'm sharing that you probably can't really see in the camera there, but it is the family tree along with some other notes that I've taken and put into a nice little Excel format so I can see the family tree as we start reading through some things. And a lot of people pass over the family tree information in the Bible, and it's probably one of the most important things in the Bible. Why would God put that stuff in there? And I used to ask that same question until he said, well, why don't you do a study on it? So I put a lot of stuff together here, and I'm going to just kind of point out some things as we go and talk about them. I know you can't see it, but I will explain what they are. So here we go, day 2, family tree. We start out with Adam and Eve having Cain and Abel, and Cain kills Abel, causing a curse to be put on Cain, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Afterward, the Lord asked Cain, "Where's your brother? Where is Abel?" "I don't know," Cain responded. Am I my brother's guardian?" So it goes on, the Lord replied, "No, for I will give a 7-fold punishment to anyone who kills you." So Cain was complaining, my punishment is too hard. God banished him from the land, and he wouldn't make the land grow crops for him. And Cain was saying, it's too harsh a punishment. God says, "I'll give a 7-fold punishment to anyone who kills you." Then the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who might try to kill him. So isn't that interesting that God puts a mark on Cain? And then in the book of Revelation, we have the mark of the beast. So in Revelation 13:16, he required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. So there's the Antichrist and the false prophet requiring a mark to be put on everybody who is against God. Who is against God, who chooses to follow them and not God. And then God also marks the 144,000 in Revelation 14. So the mark was put on them, a special mark, so that they couldn't be hurt. So there are 3 different places in the Bible where God marks people, and Satan, the Antichrist, and false prophet mark people. So interesting that people would be marked, and starting in Genesis with Cain. So we get to Cain and Abel, and we have the mark on Cain. And I want to tell you about in Leviticus 26, it says in Genesis 5, "I will give a 7-fold punishment. You'll be punished 7 times over if you hurt Cain." So look at what happens. We get all the way to Leviticus, and the Israelites have pretty much turned their backs on God. Not yet, they're going to. But God foretells the future of what's going to happen to the Israelites, being exiled from the land again, way before it happens. These are people following God and starting to worship God. And he says, look, if you don't follow my commands, you're going to get punished 7 times over. 7 seems to be the faithful number of God. In Leviticus 26:18, "And if in spite of all this you still obey me, I will punish you 7 times over for your sins." Leviticus 26:24, "Then I myself will be hostile toward you. I will personally strike you with calamity 7 times over for your sins." In 28, "I myself will punish you 7 times over for your sins." In 40, "But at last my people will confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors for betraying me and being hostile toward me." So after all of the punishment that is over, and real quickly we'll talk about this, they were exiled from their land, and they were given a certain amount of time to be exiled. God allowed them to come back, and there was a certain amount of time left over that they weren't exiled, and they turned their backs on God. And he took that time and he multiplied that by 7 times over. And that came out, my guess is, exactly to the day, 2,500 years later, where they were given their land back in May 15th, 1948, where the UN gives them their land back. Very amazing. We'll go over that when we get to those prophecies. So I wanted to brush on that for a second with the 7 times over. Revelation 13:16. I have that marked here, 13:16. that was the mark of the beast as well, that he was marking them. Okay, people say, well, there had to be other sons and daughters. Again, there was nobody else other than Adam that was created first, then Eve, and then they had Cain and Abel, and then there were other sons and daughters. So we read about all of those once we start getting to the lineage. So it starts in Genesis 5. I'm just going to read a few of these. 5:4, and this is Seth, Adam's son, and he had other sons and daughters. Then it goes down, let's see, Adam, and then Seth, and then Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. And then it keeps going, and verse 13, and he had other sons and daughters, and their sons had other sons and daughters, and their sons and daughters had other sons and daughters. And there's a whole list of those in Genesis 5. And then we finally get down to Enoch. I want to read a little bit about Enoch because this is extremely important. Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years. He was 65 years old when he had his son Methuselah. He lived another 300 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. Crazy. So God took him. He didn't die. Revelation 11:6. Let's go to Revelation 11:6. Isn't it amazing that all this is tied together? Amazing to me. 11:6. They have power. This is talking about the two witnesses. In chapter 11 of Revelation is talking about the two witnesses. So we don't know who the two witnesses are going to be. Scholars think that it's going to be Moses and Elijah. Moses did die, though, on the mountain. It is possible it's Moses. But I think maybe Enoch, because Enoch didn't die and neither did Elijah. I'll get to that in a second. 11:6. They have power to shut the sky so that no rain will fall for as long as they prophesy. And they have power to turn the rivers and oceans into blood and strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they wish. Okay, so if you think about that, you have Enoch in Genesis 5:22, possible one of the two witnesses. I talked about Elijah, so I'm just going to read a few of these verses and then we'll wrap it up. Elijah in 2 Kings chapter 1 verse 12. 2 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 17. Let's start there. 1 Kings chapter 17 verse 1. Now Elijah, who was from Tishbe in Gilead, told King Ahab, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, the God I serve, there will be no dew or rain during the next few years until I give the word. So what I'm trying to point out here is what the two witnesses are capable of doing in Revelation are the same things that Elijah did in 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 45. And soon the sky was black with clouds. A heavy wind brought a terrific rainstorm. So 7 times Elijah told him to go back. Finally, the 7th time his servant told him, I saw a little cloud about the size of a man's hand rising from the sea. So, and soon the sky was black with clouds. A heavy wind brought terrific rainstorm, and Ahab left quickly for Jezreel. Then the Lord gave special strength to Elijah. He tucked his cloak into his belt and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to the entrance of Jezreel. So not only did Elijah keep it from raining, he calls the rain back, and he runs faster than the horses carrying the king's chariot. Amazing what God's gifts can do. Then we get to 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2, chapter 2. In verse 11, as they were walking along and talking, suddenly a chariot of fire appeared, drawn by horses of fire. It drove between the two men, separating them, and Elijah was carried by a whirlwind into heaven. So Enoch and Elijah were both taken into heaven. I also want to mention something about the fire in 2 Kings chapter 1, when he called all the prophets of Baal, and he said he was going to taunt them and have them prove that Baal existed, and he took care of them. But I want to also go to 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 10. But Elijah replied to the captain, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and destroy you and your 50 men." Then fire fell from heaven and killed them all. Verse 12, Elijah replied, "If I am a man of God, let fire come down from heaven and destroy you and your 50 men. So 50 more men came. And again, the fire of God fell from heaven and killed them all. So Elijah had done all the things that is mentioned from the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. He was taken into heaven just like Enoch. So that's just a side note saying that the two witnesses in the book of Revelation could be Enoch and Elijah because they didn't die, and God might bring them back to do those sort of things. So in the lineage that we have in Genesis and in Numbers, please take that serious. It is extremely important to take notes over those things. A lot of times they're not important, but it goes from Adam all the way down into Noah. And what I have noted here, I want to point out to you as well. Adam was 926 years old when Noah was born. I just did the math. Adam lived 930 years, and if you do the math, after it tells when everybody was born, it's possible that Adam was still alive. He may have just died, but if you do the math, he probably lived another 4 years after Noah was born. But I found that very, very interesting. And then again, real quickly, Noah was 600 years when the flood came. So you put that together, 1,500 years passed from the time of creation to the time when God sends the flood to destroy the earth. So I'll touch on that again. But just think about that. Cain kills Abel, and first of all, Eve sins, Adam sins, Cain kills Abel, and there's other sons and daughters, and people start killing each other. Just evil in the Lord's sight. But it takes him 1,500 years with his grace to say, finally be upset enough to destroy the earth and the world, the people on the earth and the animals. So just interesting. So in chapter 6, we get the flood. Okay, and that's what's important. That 1,500 years pass. It takes all that time, but it also talks in the time of the lineage that we have giants during that time. And giants, it's listed many, many times. And I want to talk about that, and then Noah. So we have giants of the Anakites, the Emites, the Rephaites, and the Zamzummites. These are all descendants. But where did the giants come from? Well, it talks about the sons of God saw the beautiful women. This is in chapter 6, finally. And took any that they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, "My spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years." So that's what happens. All these people were living a long time, and then finally God said, "In the future, I'm going to make this a lot less." But he was really mad. In those days and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. I don't understand why we have to assume that aliens come from outer space to build the pyramids and all these massive 20-ton rocks in South America, or in North America, the southern part of North America, wherever all these huge rocks were moved and made these monuments. Why would you put your faith in something that we don't have any evidence of? But yet we have the Bible here that talks about giants that totally could come together and move these things. Also, you have the sons of God that were down here on the earth at the time. They could have done the exact same thing. So I don't understand why we have to put our faith in something that we really have no evidence of, but we have evidence of the Bible being accurate and true. And why can't that be? I don't see how you can put your faith in something like that when we have something like this. So tons and tons of references of giants in the Old Testament. Let's see. Noah was the only blameless person on the earth. And then he saved Noah. And from Noah, we get down to Noah. And we have sons of Noah being Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And I'm not going to go into that until maybe tomorrow. But Shem is the blessed line. Japheth was blessed as well, but Shem was guaranteed the blessing and Ham was cursed. And it's very interesting, the descendants of Ham. If we get into the descendants of Ham, I know you can't see this, but I am going to mention who the descendants of Ham are. And they are ancestors of the Canaanites, cursed for making fun of Noah. These become the lands and the nations of the people of today who hate and despise Israel in the west. Cush, Seba, Havilah, Seba, Ramah, Sabteka, Mizraim, Put, Canaan. So really what I want to point out here is Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. These are all of the lands today in the Arab world that absolutely hate the West and hate the Israelites. Spend a little bit more time on that in the days to come. So that's day 2. Hope you had a great time reading it. See you tomorrow.